Chapter 2. The Prisoner of Zenda. It was a very strange feeling for me to be standing in a forest in the middle of Mauritania in front of a person who looked exactly the same as me. For a few minutes, the future king of Mauritania and I stood looking at each other in silence. Then I bowed to him and he finally spoke. "Colonel, Fritz, who is this gentleman?" I was about to answer when Colonel Zot stepped forward and spoke quietly to the king. As the colonel talked, the king listened patiently, staring at me now and then. While they were talking, I examined him carefully. He certainly looked very like me, although there were some differences. His mouth was perhaps less wide, and my face was a little thinner. But in most ways, we were identical. Colonel Zot stopped talking, and the king suddenly began to laugh loudly. Then he stepped up to me, still laughing, and said, "It's good to meet you, cousin. You must forgive me if I seem surprised, as it's not every day that you see your double." "I hope you aren't hungry," I said. "Whether I like it or not, you can't help looking like me. No, I'll happily help you. Where are you traveling to?" "To still south, sir. To the coronation." The king looked at the two other men and smiled. "What would my brother Michael think if he saw us together?" he cried. "But sir," said Fritz von Tallenheim, "I don't think it would be a good idea for Mr. Rosendal to visit Strelsau now." "Really? What do you think?" the king asked Colonel Zot. "I agree, he mustn't go," said the old soldier. "Don't worry, sir. I understand the problem," I said. "I'll leave Mauritania today." "You don't need to go now," said the king. "Please, first you must eat with me tonight. You don't meet a new cousin every day." "Remember, sir, that we have an early start tomorrow," said Colonel Zot. "We can still eat well," said the king. "And good food is more important than sleep. Now, Mr. Rosendal, what is your first name?" "The same as yours," I answered, bowing again. "Come then, cousin Rodolphe. I don't have a house here, but I'm staying in the place my brother Michael uses for hunting. It's not the palace that I'm used to, but it will do for a few days." So I walked with the king for half an hour through the forest, talking happily until we reached a small wooden hunting lodge between the trees. The king's personal servant came out to meet us. The other servant was the mother of Jahan, the man who I had met earlier at the inn. "Is dinner ready yet, Joseph?" the king asked the servant. The servant said it was and showed us into a dining room where a table had been laid out with generous amounts of food. After my walk, I was hungry, so I ate a lot and the food was delicious. But I noticed that Colonel Zot and Fritz von Tallenheim didn't want to eat too much because of the events of the next day. "The colonel and I have to leave here at 6 tomorrow morning," Fritz explained. "We ride to Zenda and return with a guard of soldiers to take the king to the station." "It's very good of my brother to let me use his guards," said the king. "But Rodolphe, forget these two men. We don't need to get up so early, so Eat some more, cousin. We continued to eat, and Joseph continued to bring in more food. The Duke said, "I was to give you this at the end of your meal," said the servant, putting some cakes in front of us. "Well done, Michael, he knows me well," said the king happily, and he ate the cakes hungrily, as if they were the first thing he had eaten all day. I ate one of the cakes, but I had really eaten enough, and when the king seemed to have finally finished eating, I asked to go to bed. That's all I remember of that evening. The next thing I remember, I woke up suddenly covered in water. I looked up and saw Colonel Zapp standing in front of me with Fritz von Tollenheim next to him. "That wasn't funny," I said, when I realized that the colonel had thrown water over me. "Nothing else would wake you up. It's 5 o'clock, said Zapp. 5 o'clock, but it's early and... Rosendal, said Fritz in a weird voice. "You must come and look at this." He took my arm and led me to the next room. The king was lying on the floor. His face was red and he was breathing heavily. "We have been trying to wake him up for half an hour, but we can't," explained Fritz. I bent down and felt his pulse, which was very weak and slow. "It must have been those cakes that he ate last night. Do you think he was poisoned?" I asked. "We don't know," said Zapp. "We must get a doctor." "There is no doctor for 15 kilometers, and even 1,000 doctors won't make him better today," said Fritz. "But what about the coronation?" I cried. We must tell the people of Britannia that he is ill," said Fritz. "If he isn't crowned today, I don't think he'll ever be king," said Zapp. "But why?" I asked. "The whole country is waiting for him today. Most of the army is waiting too. With Duke Michael leading it. You won't be happy," said Zapp. We must tell everyone what has happened and make the most of it," said Fritz, getting up to leave. Zapp stopped him. "Do you think that he was poisoned?" he asked me. "Yes, I do," I answered. "Then who did it?" It must have been Duke Michael," Fritz said angrily. "Yes, he did this so that his brother can be crowned," continued Zapp. "You don't know what the Duke is like. Do you, Rosendal? If Roloff doesn't become king, Duke Michael will take the crown." We all sat in silence while we thought about what we could do. Then Zapp suddenly stood up. "I have an idea. It was lucky that we met you yesterday," he said excitedly, looking at me. "Because you can go to Strelsau to be crowned." "Me? That's impossible," I laughed. "People would realize that I'm not the king, and don't forget that I'm English." It would be easy to forget that," said Fritz, "because your German is perfect, and if we dress you in different clothes, no one will know." "If you don't go to Strelsau, Duke Michael will be king tonight, and the king will either be dead or in prison," said Zapp. "I understand what you are saying, but the king would never forgive me if I..." Our country needs this, cried Zapt. Standing up, I walked round in the room in silence. The clock ticked 60 times, then 70, 80. I looked at the booking lying on the floor and realized I had no choice. Zapt clearly read my expression, because he smiled even before I said quietly, "Very well, I'll go." "We won't wait for Michael's guards, but leave for Solsau at once," said Zapt. "We can hide the king in the cellar, so when the guards arrive, they will think no one is here," said Zapt. What if they search the building?" asked Fritz. "Joseph would say the hunting lodge is empty," said Zapt. "This is our only chance." "How will we get the king to Strelsau?" I asked. "Tonight we'll sleep in the palace," said Zapt. "As soon as we are alone in the king's bedroom, you and I will leave and come back here on our horses. Fritz can stay and guard the king's bedroom in the palace, and I will tell Joseph to get the king ready for the journey back. The king will then return to the palace with me in the dark. Meanwhile, you will ride as fast as you can to the border and try to leave the country before it's light. Do we all agree on this plan?" "I agree," I said. It's a good plan," said Fritz. Zapt and Fritz picked up the king and began to carry him out of the room. But we realized we were being watched by Johan's mother, who looked at us with a strange expression before walking off. "I think she hid us," said Zapt. "After we have moved the king, I'll speak to her." Meanwhile, Joseph began to dress me in some of the king's clothes. When Fritz returned, he looked at me and said, You know, I think we can do this." "What happened to Johan's mother?" I asked. She's locked in the cellar with the king," said Fritz. "Joseph will let her out later after Michael has gone, but I'm sure when they find that the king isn't here, Michael will realize we know about his plan." "Let's go," said Zapt, returning into the room. Is all safe here?" asked Fritz. "No, nothing's safe anywhere, but we must do our best," answered Zapt. We were now all in uniforms and set off on horses. It was a cool morning, and Zapt immediately began to tell me the history of the king's life, his family, likes, interests, weaknesses, friends, and servants. He told me how I should behave in the palace, and said he would always be at my side to tell me who the people were that I met. Soon, we reached the station. Fritz told the surprised-looking station guard that the king had changed his plans, and we got on the train to the capital. I looked at my watch, or I should say, the king's watch, and asked Fritz if he thought Duke Michael had found the king. "I hope not," said Fritz. After a short time, we passed the towers and buildings of the capital, and I could see we were near the station. "How are you feeling?" asked Zapt. "Nervous," I replied. "I'm not made of stone, you know." "You will be fine, but we are an hour earlier than they expect, so there will be no one to meet us. We must send word to the palace, so meanwhile, I'll have breakfast," I cried. "The king's hungry." Zapt smiled at me, then took my hand. "Let's hope we are all alive tonight." The train stopped, and I breathed deeply as we stepped out onto the station at Strelsau. A moment later, and everything was suddenly busy. Men ran up to us, then ran away again. Soldiers rode off on horses. Other men showed me to the station restaurant. As I ate breakfast, I could hear music and people cheering. God save the king! In preparation for the coronation. God save both kings, said that. When we left the restaurant, we saw that a group of soldiers had arrived to welcome us. It was led by a tall old man whose jacket was covered in medals. That is Marshal Strauchan's, said that. So that I knew who he was, a very important person in the army. The marshal greeted me and said he was sorry that the Duke couldn't meet me at the station, but that he would see me shortly. I answered as politely and formally as I could, and began to feel less nervous when no one seemed to realize that I wasn't the real king. But I saw that Fred was still very nervous when he shook the marshal's hands. The soldiers led us out of the station, where we got onto horses that were waiting outside. I began to ride through the capital with the marshal on my right and Zot on my left. As we were riding, I saw that the city was partly old and partly new. There were wide modern streets, where the rich people lived in big houses. These were the people who had always lived well under the king's father and who would support the new king, because they knew that nothing would change. But behind the modern streets was a very different area that made up the old town. Here, thousands of people were crowded into tiny houses, which were old and hot in the summer, freezing cold in the winter. These narrow streets were where the city's many poor people lived, and these people didn't want things to stay the same. For that reason, they didn't like the king and supported Duke Michael, who told them he wanted things to be different and gave them hope for a better future. I knew that this area wouldn't be very safe for me, the king. We continued towards a great square where the palace stood. There were colored flags and colorful ribbons everywhere, and people lined the streets clapping and cheering. I waved to them as we passed, and people threw flowers down from the balconies above me. One flower fell on my horse, so I picked it up and stuck it onto my coat. Seeing me do this, the marshal looked at me, but I couldn't tell from his expression whether he was happy or angry. Nevertheless, I smiled happily at the marshal. I've written happily, but that is really how I felt. The truth is, at the moment, I really believed that I was actually the king. I looked up and laughed, delighted to see so much color and so many happy faces. Then I looked again in surprise. There, on a balcony above me, with the broad smile of the traveler in the train, Antoinette de Maupin. As she stared at me, her expression changed. Surely she knew who I was. Surely she would call out, "This is not the real king."